All right, hey, and hello everybody. I'm going to get us started on the walkthrough for the podcast project. This is probably going to be the most complicated and intricate walkthrough yet because there's a lot of moving parts to this project. So the podcast project, if you didn't know, corresponds with the audio recording chapter of the book. So it's going to teach us how to use a microphone like this one to record our voice professionally into our DAW with our audio interface, and then we're going to edit it together into a podcast. If you didn't know, a podcast is a spoken word audio show, meaning that it's going to be primarily your voice, but there's also going to be some music that goes along with it too. And we'll get into that. I'm going to really gloss through these, some of these instructions because some of them are really self-explanatory and you've already done it and you know how to do it. So I'm not going to revisit any of that. The new stuff about how to hook the microphones up and how to record audio, that's what we're going to dive into here. So this walkthrough video is going to mostly focus on part 3 and a little bit of part 4 to show you how to blend the different things together into a final product. So let's get started here. Okay, so the main goal here is to learn how to use the interface and the microphone to record, and then also to edit together a full long audio project, a larger audio project. So there's 4 different parts, and keep in mind the way I've designed this, it's going to be a double grade, right? 2 grades because it is significant in its length, right? So I gotta fix that. I don't like that underline being there. I'll go back and fix that. So it's a pretty lengthy project, and so it's gonna be worth 2 grades. Here's your goals. Remember, this is what you're graded on, so make sure you do these 4 things. I'm sorry, no, requirements is what you're graded on. I already said we're going to do all that stuff, which, by the way, this is actually the 4 steps that we're going to take, the 4 different parts. We're going to come up with a podcast topic and then compose music, 2 songs, 2 different pieces of music that is going to play during the podcast. We're going to write a script for the podcast. Every word you say is going to be written down first. We're going to record the script using your voice, an audio interface, and a microphone, and then we're going to edit it all together into a 4 or 5 minute show. All right, here's the requirements. Length, 4 or 5 minutes. I'll show you how to change your ruler to display the time instead of the beats in a second when we get into the DAW. So it's got to be between 4 and 5 minutes. We'll get more into that in a second. You're going to have intro music. You're going to have 2 songs, intro and background. The intro music needs to be at least a minute long. It's not very long, and that's because it's only going to be at the beginning and maybe at the end. And it's got to contain an original melody written and played by you. So it can't be all loops, right? You got to play at least the melody, at least the main part of your intro music. Podcast has that background music, which is also made by you. This one can be all loops. I really don't care. I gotta edit this. This one can be all loops. I really don't care. Before you record the podcast, you need to write out a script of what you plan to say. This helps you edit. This makes editing go by like that. So make sure you write down your script. The script is going to be looked at. The script is part of the grade. The script is a requirement. If you don't write the script down, that's one of the requirements you have not met. And then your podcast needs a unique name. So you got to call it, the fun sports podcast or whatever you end up doing. So let's get started. That is the first part, by the way. The first thing you're going to do after you watch this video is come up with a topic. It can be about anything you want, but it's important that you choose something that you actually care about so that you can speak at length about it. You need to be able to write a few paragraphs of interesting information about the topic. So my example I always use is I play a lot of video games. There's Pikachu. Like Pokemon. So I would do a podcast maybe about Pokemon. I could talk about Pokemon all day. So you can maybe choose something that you're interested in. That way it's easier to write, easier to talk about, and an easy way to get a theme for your music. So once you have a podcast theme, stop, and then we're going to go compose a couple of songs. Now, this is the part I'm going to gloss over because you already know how to make music in your DAW at this point in the process. You should be able to do that easy. I've got a couple of pieces that I'm going to use as my songs, but actually, let's open something up. And this is an old project you've seen, but I'm going to close that. Let's open something up, and I'm just going to really quick put something together just to show you the whole process that we need to go through. You again need to spend more time on this, make it at least a minute long, and then also make sure you play one of the things. So I'm just gonna kind of drag a couple of things in here and make it a few seconds long, just to give it something. I'm literally not even listening to these. These might sound terrible together, but we'll find out, won't we? We'll find out together. Maybe a shaker can go in there. Who knows? Who knows? And then, yeah, let's see what that sounds like. And then just for completion's sake, maybe I will play a melody over it. I'll grab a synthesizer here, and I'll just throw a melody on top of that. Try to do this quickly. Yeah, I'll just make something up. Here we go. I'm actually going to extend this a little longer. There you go. I've made my intro music. Obviously, I want you to take longer to do that. But that is how long I'm going to take to do it. So let me just tighten that up real quick. And then that is going to be my podcast intro music. I'm done. Let's pretend it's a minute long. Okay, when you're finished with your podcast intro music, which again, spend more time on, make it themed to your podcast, make sure it all sounds good. We got to get a bounce out of it. I don't even need a project file for this one, so I'm just, you should save it in case you want to, edit it later. But I'm going to grab a bounce out of this. For this, we're going to start to use wave bounces. So I don't actually know if that is what goes through the instructions there. Let's find out. Yeah, we're going to do a wave bounce. This is the project where we start a wave bounce. And what a wave is just a different audio file that happens to be uncompressed. So it's going to give us better audio quality. To do that, we come up to PCM, make sure PCM is checked and MP3 is not checked. Same process as before. We need to get the end of our video. I'm sorry, the end of our audio, which happens to be 19 there. So I'm going to change this to 19. And PCM. You can leave all of this stuff just how it looks right here. Wave 24, 44, 100, interleave, no dithering. All that stuff is fine. We hit OK. We're going to give this a name, which is going to be, I believe, in the thing, it says to call it podcast intro music. So that's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it. It's not letting me type for some reason. So let's do that again. Not let me do anything now. There we go. No, can't do things. There we go. It's because that preview was open. So I'm gonna call this podcast intro music. And then I'm going to use something that I've already made for the background music just so that I can show you how it works. So now I've got that. Great. Next thing we have to do is write a script. So the script can be written in just a Word document of your choice. Depending on where you are, your teacher might have one provided for you. But if not, you're going to write a script. Now, the podcast script is everything that you're going to say during your podcast, every single thing. So an easy place to start is to do an intro where, kind of like what I do at the beginning of these videos, as I introduce myself and what we're doing. You can do the same things here. So I have provided this little template. Hello, my name is whatever. Welcome to my podcast. Today we're talking about Pikachu, right? All right, let's get started. Take that and kind of mold that into your own. Make it something that you would actually say, per se. You want to be, authentic about it. Then you're going to write the bulk of your script. Which is going to be all of the stuff you want to say. So again, if I was doing a podcast about Pikachu, maybe I would go to an internet web source and find a bunch of information about Pikachu, how he's number 25 in the Pokédex, and he's an electric type, and he is, the electric mouse is what he's called. And I could talk all about Pikachu, and I'll write that all down in my script. Then what I'll do is I will take my script and I will start a timer on my phone, and I will read the script out loud slowly to myself and see about how long that took me. You want to shoot for maybe around 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Between 3 and 4 is what you really want to be at. So 3.5, a little over 3, that's fine. Of you talking, because we're going to fill the rest of your podcast out with music and maybe even sound effects if you want to. So there's no word minimum count, but there is a time minimum count. So make sure that you spend enough time talking. And then we're going to do the outro. Also write this down, which is about the same as the intro, but in reverse, right? Thanks for listening to the podcast. Hope you had a great time. Reintroduce yourself and sign off, right? That's just the general format of a podcast. And this is a very short podcast. So hopefully you're able to do that pretty easily. Now, part 3 is where the bulk of these instructions are going to be, and then a little bit in part 4. But I want to show you how to record audio with a microphone and an interface into Logic. So I'm actually going to pull up a little video. You should be able to see at some point soon of my interface that I'm using right now to record with this microphone into the software to record my screen. And I'm also going to show you how to set that up with Logic. So let's go through the interface real quick. On the interface, you can see a couple different things, and sorry if my audio gets a little weird here. I've got to stretch some weird ways to be able to point at this interface. On the left here, you see this green that is flashing every time you hear me talk. That right there is it's telling me how loud my microphone is, and that's the gain knob for my microphone. Directly to the left of that is where the microphone is actually plugged in. This is the microphone input 1, and this interface has a second channel 2, right there next to it. So this is a 2-channel interface, right? Over on the right side, if I wanted to, I could plug another microphone into channel 2, and I've got my gain knob there. There's a couple of other switches. This red button is my phantom power. The microphone I'm using right now is a large diaphragm condenser, so it needs phantom power. If the phantom power is not on, you wouldn't be able to hear me right now. Next to that is this big silver knob, which is the volume of the monitors that I have on either side of me. My studio monitors plugged into the back of the interface. I can increase the volume of the monitors or decrease it. I've got it turned all the way off right now because I'm listening through headphones to anything. It's nighttime here, so I don't want to make a bunch of noise. And then right next to that is this little tiny gain knob. Well, not gain knob, it's volume knob, but that is my headphones volume. And below the headphone volume is actually where my headphones are plugged in. You can see right there, that's where I plug my headphones in. So that is kind of the basics of how this thing works. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get your microphone ready. Microphone set up just like this. You'll plug one end of the XLR cable into the bottom of the microphone. You should be able to figure out which end that is. Plug the other end into your audio interface, and then hopefully your audio interface has some sort of light on it like mine does. Again, as you can see, it's blinking green. And you're going to want to talk into your microphone about as loud as you're going to talk during the recording process, maybe even a little louder, and adjust the knob so that it is green. Now, I'm not going to go through the process of turning this up and down to show you the colors changing, because if I did that, my microphone would get really loud and you wouldn't like that noise, and then it would get really soft. So mine's perfectly in the green here. Mine happens to be straight up down the middle, 12 o'clock, right in the middle of the knob there, and that's about right for me. So once that is happening, you're going to make sure your interface is plugged in, of course, to your computer. And then we're going to go into Logic Pro. I'm going to get a new project open. And here, stuff gets a little different. So don't just go click and create like you usually do. We have to make sure we have an audio type track type. And then, even more importantly, there's 2 things we need to do. One is set your input to be the correct input. Interfaces are usually pretty good about actually matching the numbers. So as you can see, I'm plugged into input 1 over here. So I'm going to make sure I select input 1. I could also select input 2. I could even select input 1 and 2, and it'll combine them down to one track, but I want input 1. Output, you want to just do whatever it defaults to, which is usually output 1, 2. And then you can turn on input monitoring or record enable if you want to. I'm going to leave those off for right now because we're going to talk about those in a second. If you don't see any of these options, that's probably because your DAW is set up to use the wrong audio device. Right here where it says device, you can see it says Scarlett 2i4 USB, which is the name of my interface. If yours says system setting, or if it says MacBook Pro speakers or iMac speakers, then you've got the wrong device output and input set. So you got to set it to the name of your audio interface. I happen to have two audio interfaces plugged into this computer, another one sitting behind me, or of course my drums. If I had that one set up, you wouldn't be able to hear any of this because my mics are plugged into this one. So make sure the correct audio input is set up there. And then we're going to hit create. Once we do that, we'll see a couple things. First off, on the track header for audio 1 here, you can see that the volume fader has this green line that goes up and down whenever I talk. And if I get really close to the microphone, watch your ears, that will get louder. And if I get really far away from the microphone, it'll get softer, because that is just basically a digital representation of the little green light that is still blinking away on my interface. So that's a good way to know that you've got signal. Another way is if you have headphones. Only do this if you have headphones. You can click this I, which turns on input monitoring. And right now I can hear my voice in my headphones. Usually I can't do that. Now I can hear my voice in my headphones after all the various effects that may or may not be on it. And what that lets you do is just preview what it sounds like, make sure it's not too loud, and make sure there's no weird hissing or echoing or stuttering or any weird computery glitches going on. So it's a good idea to do that. And a lot of people like to leave it on while they're recording audio, just because you can hear your voice in your head, you know what you sound like, you can affect your tone to take on maybe a calmer demeanor because it's a podcast about boring news or something. But I'm not going to do that. I know what my voice sounds like, so I'm going to turn that off. When you want to record something, now it's really easy. There's just one thing you got to do. You just got to click record, right? There's this button called record enable. We don't need to use that a whole lot. What record enable does is it lets us record multiple tracks at once. So if I had 3 microphones plugged up to this and I wanted all of them to record at once so that it could hear my voice, and then also maybe capture a guitar I'm playing and maybe like a drum I've got on my foot, I'd have 3 microphones. I need to record enable every track so that they all record at once. For us, we only have 1 track. So as long as the track's highlighted, it will record. Okay, so another thing that we're going to do real quick that's pretty easy to do is to come in here to, let's see if I can remember where this is. It always, not track, project settings. We're going to come into our project settings under File. Sorry, that took me a second. And if I click on the project settings general, we can change this project type to, instead of saying use musical grid, we can uncheck that. And now it will show us the same timeline, but in minutes and seconds instead of in a musical grid, which is nice for recording audio. In that same vein, we can click right here and change this to say time. So now it shows us our current time. Wherever this playhead is, that's how many seconds deep we are. So right now, this is 20 seconds into our podcast. This is 50 seconds in. That's helpful because, again, you know that you're supposed to talk for about 3 minutes. So hopefully that helps you do that. When you're ready to record, make sure these purple buttons are turned off because you don't need them, and just hit record, and it should start recording your voice. If you see these little waveforms happening, that means it's working. Right now it's recording what I'm saying while you're also hearing what I'm saying, hopefully, on the software to capture my screen. If I hit stop recording, I can go back and listen to that, and it should start recording your voice. If you see these little waveforms happening, that means it's working. Right now it's recording. I can turn that down. You're also hearing what I'm saying, hopefully, on the my left ear to capture my screen. Lots of fun things you can do there. So you're just going to now, at this point, read out your script. Now I'm going to give you a quick live demo of something that I actually did in the book, where I show you, let me get through all of the microphone talk. where I actually show you what to do if you make a mistake. So in this instance, I made a mistake in the podcast and I edited it out. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's say that I'm talking about Pikachu. I'm saying Pikachu is one of my favorite Pokemon. He is an electric mouse, and he's number 26 in the Actually, he's number 25 in the Pokédex, which means he's one of the first ones. He was in the first game, and he was only the 25th one they came up with. So you could hear in there that I made a pretty bad mistake. I said the wrong number. And so what I'm going to show you how to do now is to edit that out. We're going to edit out the part where I said the mistake, so I don't have to re-record that whole sentence. It's pretty easy. I'm just going to listen back. And he's number 26, an electric mouse, and he's number 26. That right there is where I said the wrong thing. Mouse, and he's number 26, and he's electric mouse. So right about here, and he's number 26 in the Poké is where the mistake is, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right before the mistake, and we're going to use this function again from the book called split audio. And how we're going to do that is we'll right click, we'll hit split, and then hit split at playhead. You can also hit Command T. I'm just going to cut that right there. As you can see now, it's two separate tracks right before the mistake. So I'll listen again, and then right after the mistake, I'm going to do the same thing. And he's number 26 in the Poké. So that's about where I stopped the mistake. Actually, he's number, and that's where I want it to come back in. So I'm going to split there again. This time I'm going to use the key command, Command T. And this is the bad part. And so all I'm going to do is delete it. I can now drag this in, and it's like that mistake never happened. We can listen to it and see how it sounds. Is an electric mouse. He's number 25 in the Pokédex. There's a little bit of a weird gap there that I'm going to try to fill in. An electric mouse, and he's number 25. You can still hear that gap. One thing you can do to fix that is you can blend them together by dragging them on top of each other like that. It'll create this fade region, and so hopefully it'll make it sound a little more natural. An electric mouse, and he's number 25. So there is still a little bit of weirdness, and so you can just play around with this until it sounds about right. And he's number 25 in the Pokédex. That sounds about right. Electric mouse, and he's number 25 in the Pokédex, which means he's one of the first. Yeah. So you can hear I edited out my mistake, and now I've got this nice join in there. And then if I wanted to make that one solid clip like this, I can just highlight them both and then use the join command right there. It will say non-contiguous audio regions, blah, blah, blah. And then it will join them together. Mouse, and he's number 25 in the Pokédex. And so it sounds like I never even made the mistake in the first place. You're going to do that until your whole script is recorded. And your script is 3 minutes long, right? So we're going to pretend the whole script is recorded. Let me do a little fake recording of my script real quick. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to incorporate our songs into the podcast. So here's me fake recording. I might just skip over this for the video. Hey everybody, welcome to the Big Pokemon podcast. I'm Mr. Price. Today we're going to be talking about Pikachu, one of the earliest and best and most known Pokemon. So, let's get started. Pika Pika. And then I'll record a little outro. We'll make that the bulk of my podcast. Obviously, this is just me showing you a very shortened version of what you're going to do. Thanks for listening to the Cool Pokemon podcast. Hope you find a lot of Pikachus out in the wild, and you appreciate that little electric mouse. See you later. So that is the outro. Now, this is my whole podcast. Let's pretend. And what I want to do now is show you how to edit together your actual show. And this is something we go over in part 4 of the instructions. Basically what you're going to need to start part 4 is your project that you recorded your voice in, which I've already got open, and then your 2 songs. And once you have your 2 songs, you just need to drag them in to your project. So let me go grab those 2 songs. I think they were in Final Bounces. Here's my intro music. I'm just going to grab it, drag it in and plop it down. And then I'm going to use this 12-bar blues that I did a long time ago for our 12-bar blues project as my background music. Now that all my music's in there, all I need to do is two things. First off, your intro should play. Your intro music should play for maybe, 30 seconds, 25 seconds maybe. I'm at this point kind of rushing through this because I would like you to be able to get started on this. Let's have my intro music play for about the first 15 seconds, just like that. You can see it's actually about the first 20 before my talking comes in. Let's see how that sounds. Hey everybody, welcome to the Big Pokemon Podcast. I'm Mr. As you can hear, the music is still playing while I'm talking. So I'm going to show you now how to use this thing called automation to fade that out. Okay. To do that, I'm going to click the automation menu button here. It's going to open this automation menu. There's two ways to do automation. You can either record automation live and move sliders, or the easier thing I like to do is just manipulate this line. We're going to volume automate this line right here. So first, let's set it where I want it to start, which is fairly loud because it's the first thing that's going to happen. Let's say I want that line, or I want that song to fade in a little bit, so it's not just right at the beginning. All you've got to do is click the line to put a point on it, and then you can manipulate these points to make this line slope go up and down. And as the line goes up and down, your volume will go up and down. So now you're going to hear the volume start at nothing, negative infinity, and it's going to come up to around the -5.5 decibel range. And what I'm going to do, and I'm just realizing that I bounced my intro music with the metronome still playing. How embarrassing. Don't do that. You can hear the click in the background. What I'm going to do now is when I start talking, I'm going to have that fade back down. Not all the way out, but down so that you can hear me. Watch. I'll put a point right where my talking is about to start, and another point at the end. And I'm going to, or maybe I'll even put the other point right here. And I'm going to fade this song out as soon as I start talking. Something like this. And so it's going to go from loud to gets really quiet as I start, and then fades to almost to nothing as my intro goes on. Hey everybody, welcome to the Big Pokemon Podcast. I'm Mr. Price. Today we're going to be talking about Pikachu, one of the earliest and best and most known Pokemon. So, let's get started. Pika Pika. And then as soon as your intro is over, this is where you're going to fade in your background music. So I'll drag the background music to be right there, and I will just, again, use an automation line to fade this in. Just put a couple points in there and let it fade in. We'll see what that sounds like here. Pika. Man, I left the metronome on for that bounce too. It's a bad song. Yeah, so because of that, I'm gonna strip off the beginning of this, and we'll just ignore that little click. Sorry about that. So here we go. I will once again fade in the song here. Let's get started. Pika Pika. Now you want this to fade into a pretty low volume because now I'm going to put the main bulk of my podcast on top of that background music. We'll let the background music play for a second, and then I'll come in to talk about Pikachu. Let's get started. Pika Pika. I'm saying Pikachu is one of my favorite Pokemon. He is an electric mouse, and he's number 25 in the Pokédex, which means he's one of the first ones. He was in the first game, and he was only the 25th one they came up with. So again, as you can hear, yours is going to be 3 minutes long of that. So there's going to be lots of time for you to talk. And that music is pretty low during that so that you can actually hear my voice. And then what happens is, let's pretend this is the end of your podcast. You're going to fade that background music completely out. Completely out. Okay, so your background music only plays during the main part of your podcast there. And then you've got your outro to deal with. And all we have to do for your outro is we need to snug the outro in there. But right before your outro happens, we're actually going to listen to your intro music again. And it's going to play under your outro. So once again, as you can see, I copy and pasted, and it went ahead and copied the automation data for me. I'm going to fade in my intro music, start talking, and then the intro music will fade out at the end. So what we actually want to happen is for that to not be quite that loud, though. Want it to do that. And then it's going to get a little bit louder at the end as I finish talking. Again, I'm just kind of crafting this line to be what I want. You could put an unlimited amount of points on this line. I want it to play for a second, and then at the very end, just fade out all the way into nothing, and that'll be the end of my podcast. So my background fades out. Here comes my intro music. Thanks for listening to the Cool Pokemon Podcast. Hope you find a lot of Pikachus out in the wild, and you appreciate that little electric mouse. See you later. So that's it. Again, this is kind of just a blueprint of how it should kind of look. Yours is going to be on a much bigger scale. But as a review, intro music fades in. Talking starts. Right before that, intro music fades down to low so that you can hear the talking, and then it goes away completely. Your background music fades in to very low. Your podcast happens, most of your talking. At the end of your podcast, it fades back all the way to nothing, and your intro music comes back. Or you could even compose a new song, a new outro song if you want to. And then your outro happens. You can hear it with the music behind it. Your music might get a little louder at the end to play out the podcast. That's what I did here. You can really do that however you want. You could have it all just fade down if you want to. And then everything fades out at the end. So there's a lot of fades happening just so there's no like heavy starts and stops. When you're done with that, you're going to give your podcast a listen. Make sure you're at the required time. I'm not, because this is an example I put together in just a few minutes. And then you're going to, of course, bounce this, just like you would any other project. So as usual for projects like these, I want to have a save project file that you're going to call your name, podcast project, and then also a bounce, an MP3 bounce of your project. It can be a wave bounce too. MP3 works. Doesn't really matter at this point. On the next project, it will matter that we use waves, but for now, we're still good with MP3s. And so by the end of this, you should have a podcast audio show. You can post that to YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever you want. So that is the podcast project. Get started on that. Have fun recording podcasts about Pokemon, hopefully.